Number 3. Cheryl Love. In early 2015, Bobby and Cheryl Love lived in Brooklyn, New York. In March 2015, they were going to celebrate their 30th wedding anniversary. They met in the early 1980s when they both worked in the cafeteria of a medical center in Brooklyn. On their first date, they saw the movie Purple Rain, starring Prince. On another early date, they saw Gladys Knight and the Pips. They got married in March 1985. They went on to have 4 children together, 2 daughters and twin sons. In many ways, Bobby and Cheryl's life together was very much of a typical American family. Their kids were involved in sports, they did volunteer work, and they regularly attended church, where Bobby was a deacon. At times, the family struggled financially, and Bobby worked several jobs at once. Sometimes he only slept an hour a night. In 2015, 3 of their 4 children lived with them. They were also grandparents. But the family's illusion of normalcy was shattered on January 22, 2016. It started out like any other morning. 51-year-old Cheryl was making tea in the kitchen, and 64-year-old Bobby was in bed. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was a dozen NYPD officers and FBI agents. They went into the bedroom and woke Bobby up. They asked him his name, and he said Bobby Love. They asked him what his real name was, and he said Walter Miller. One of the officers replied, quote, "You've had a long run," unquote. Bobby Love, aka Walter Miller, was a wanted fugitive who had been on the lam since November 1977. For simplicity's sake, we'll call him Bobby. In 1971, 20-year-old Bobby was living in Washington, D.C. He was originally from North Carolina. Since his early teens, he had been committing petty crimes. He spent time in a juvenile center where other kids repeatedly assaulted him. He escaped from the detention center and fled to Washington, D.C. He moved in with his brother and started attending school. Bobby then started hanging out with young men who robbed banks in North Carolina. Bobby said they robbed banks in North Carolina because there was less security. In June 1971, Walter and 3 other men robbed a bank in Greensboro, North Carolina. At the time, 2 men and a woman were working. The employees were bound with belts. One of the men was pistol whipped, and the other man was kicked in the head. The 4 men gathered up about $770. Unbeknownst to them, the manager had triggered the silent alarm, and the police were waiting for them outside. Bobby tried to run, and he was shot in the buttocks. Bobby and the 3 other men were arrested. In August 1971, Bobby was convicted of armed robbery, and he was sentenced to 25 to 30 years of prison. Initially, he was incarcerated at maximum security prison. He had a hard time settling in, and he received 5 misconducts. While he was incarcerated, his mother died, and it deeply affected him. After that, he decided to behave himself. Because of his good behavior, he was transferred to the Triangle Correctional Center, a minimum security prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He had several jobs in the jail, including hosting a radio show that aired weekly on a college radio station. Bobby much preferred the minimum security prison, which he described as more of a camp. He said that the problem started one day when the prison captain was walking across the parking lot. As he walked, someone yelled, "Punk ass," at him. The captain didn't see who called him that, but he said he recognized Bobby's voice. Bobby claims it wasn't him because he was in the kitchen at the time. The guard wrote him up and then continued to pick on him. Bobby claims he was written up for minor things and things he didn't do. He was worried with all the infractions he'd be sent back to the maximum security prison. He was then placed on the worst job detail, the road crew that cleaned highways. In November 1977, Bobby was 6 years into his sentence and 13 months away from his first parole hearing. But he decided he was done serving his sentence. He started saving his money and memorizing the bus routes they took to clean the highways. On November 8, 1977, 2 days after his 27th birthday, Bobby put on the street clothes he wore for the radio job and then put his prison uniform on over them. He boarded the bus that morning to go work on the road crew. He sat in the back seat. Only one correctional officer was on the bus, and he was driving. When they slowed down at an intersection, Bobby opened the emergency door at the back of the bus. He jumped out and ran from the bus while the alarm blared. When he felt he had put enough distance between him and the bus, he discarded his prison uniform. He then made his way to the Greyhound bus station. He found a man in the parking lot who bought a ticket on his behalf. It was $10 to travel to New York City. In New York, he got a low-end hotel room for $8 a night and mostly ate hot dogs. When he escaped, he only had about $100. When he ran out of money, he slept on trains. He then started to build a new life. He took on the name Bobby Love, which was the name of his friend's deceased son. The first thing he did was get a new Social Security number. He went to a Social Security Administration office and told an employee he had lost all his identification. She gave him a new Social Security card. He then somehow got a birth certificate with a different name. He scratched out the name on it and typed Bobby Love. He photocopied the altered birth certificate until it looked like it hadn't been altered. He then found a funeral home employee who notarized the birth certificate but didn't sign it. He then took the birth certificate to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and he said that the worker pretended not to notice it wasn't signed. So he was able to get a driver's license. Using his new forms of identification, he got a job at the medical center cafeteria where he met Cheryl. Then, on January 22, 2015, 37 years, 2 months, and 2 weeks after Bobby escaped, he was taken back into custody. Bobby never talked much about his past. He did not tell Cheryl he was a wanted fugitive because he didn't think she could keep a secret like that. She would have convinced him to turn himself in. He did not want to turn himself in because he felt that Walter was dead and Bobby was a law-abiding, hard-working family man. He was never overly worried about being caught because he planned to never do anything illegal again. The police never revealed how they tracked down Walter Miller, aka Bobby Love, after 37 years. However, Bobby did keep in contact with family in North Carolina. He even attended some family gatherings. The year before he was recaptured, he had attended the funeral of 2 of his siblings. He believes a relative involved with law enforcement turned him in. In hindsight, Cheryl said she noticed some odd things about her husband of 3 decades. For example, he did not like to be photographed. Also, at times, he seemed cold and distant. After Bobby was recaptured, he was not charged with the escape. Instead, it was handled through the disciplinary process. Bobby Love was paroled on January 5, 2016, a few weeks shy of the first anniversary of his recapture. Cheryl and Bobby stayed together after he was arrested. Bobby also legally changed his name to Bobby Love. In October 2021, the couple published a memoir about their life together titled The Redemption of Bobby Love, a story of faith, family, and justice. Number 2, Margaret Bult. In mid-1987, 37-year-old Margaret Bult was a newly divorced single mother living in Salt Lake City, Utah. She had 3 daughters. One night, at the prodding of her friends, she agreed to go to a country western bar. At the bar, she met a 38-year-old man calling himself Jean-Paul Lanier. Jean-Paul ended up leaving the bar with Margaret's phone number. Sean Paul called her and they arranged a date. They dined at a restaurant on their first date and he told her about his past. He said he was from New Zealand. He stated that he was a chef that had been trained at the renowned Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, France, and he aspired to open a restaurant. His parents and siblings had been killed in a plane crash. He was also a widower. He claimed he lost his wife in childbirth, but he did have 2 children, a son living in Montana and a daughter in California. They were both in college. Margaret and Sean Paul continued to date, but after 2 months, she ended things with Sean Paul after a bizarre series of incidents. Sean Paul had purchased gym memberships and workout clothes for her and her daughters. She refused to take them because she thought it was too generous. Without her knowledge, Sean Paul entered her home through a window and left the gifts for them. A few days later, Sean Paul asked Margaret if he could take her daughters out for ice cream, but she said no because she didn't feel comfortable with them going with him alone after he broke into their home. But Sean Paul took them anyway. Margaret was furious and ended the relationship. A few months later, Sean Paul contacted Margaret again. He said his daughter, who lived in California, had been killed when a drunk driver hit her car. Being a parent herself, Margaret was very sympathetic. They started dating again, and within a year of meeting, they were married. Although Margaret had married Sean Paul, she noticed some odd and disturbing things about him. Sean Paul was terrible with money, yet he wanted to control her finances. He even convinced her to take out a second mortgage to do renovations on the home. When she got the money, she gave it to Sean Paul, who was going to do the renovations himself. Additionally, Sean Paul claimed to be from New Zealand, but he had an American accent. Also, sometimes when people called him Sean, he didn't respond. One time, he had to represent the restaurant where he was the chef by making a TV appearance on a local station for the news program's cooking segment. He was really nervous about the appearance and tried to get out of it, but he wasn't able to. When he appeared on the show, he wore a big chef's hat that he pulled down low and dark sunglasses. Margaret said that she barely recognized him. Margaret knew that something was off about her husband, but he always seemed to have a plausible answer for everything. In February 1988, Margaret had a male friend call a woman who Sean Paul said he had worked with at a country club in Marion County, Ohio. The woman said she had never heard of Sean Paul in a year. Sean Paul had told Margaret he had also been the director of an Ohio holding company. Margaret's friend asked the woman if she knew anyone who had that job, and she said no. Margaret felt that every time she investigated Sean Paul's claims, something was amiss with them. On March 20th, 1988, Margaret got a call from a friend. She told him to turn on a new TV show, America's Most Wanted. It was the show's 7th ever episode. They were doing a segment on a 39-year-old man named Paul Stephen Mack who bore a striking resemblance to Sean Paul. Mack was a con man. He married women, stole all their money, ran up the bills, and then left town. So far, he had married 7 women. But he wasn't wanted for swindling the women. He was wanted for 2 murders. About 8 years earlier, on July 8, 1981, 19-year-old Ned Huddle went missing after leaving work at the Marion Country Club in Marion, Ohio. Huddle had called her family and said she had a ride home, but she never made it there. 3 days later, her partially clad body was found in the Old Tangy River outside of Marion. A cause of death could not be determined, but it's believed she was sexually assaulted. The police talked to Huddle's family, and they said that Mack had been making her uncomfortable with his constant sexual advances. The police spoke with Mack, and he stated he had not spoken to Huddle that day. But several people said he offered her a ride that day and invited her to his home to smoke marijuana. When Mac was interviewed a second time, he admitted he had given Huddle some marijuana, but he maintained he had not committed the murder. The 2 times Mac was interviewed, he never mentioned he was on parole. In April 1981, he pleaded guilty to embezzling over $9,000 from the restaurant he managed in Bucyrus, Ohio. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years of prison. Since Mac was on parole, the police were able to search his home without getting a warrant. However, they found nothing of interest. Because Mac admitted to giving marijuana to Huddle, he was sent back to jail for violating his parole. He was released in 1985. Mac then moved to Sacramento, California. In early 1987, Paul Mac again became the suspect in a murder. 21-year-old Karen Winslet worked as a hostess at a restaurant and was a part-time model. Winslet had recently won the title Miss English Leather in Las Vegas, Nevada. On February 19, 1987, 21-year-old Karen Winslet told her boyfriend she was going for a modeling job. She said she was going to pose for a Budweiser calendar. She wrote down the address of the home where she was going for the photo shoot. Winslet never returned home. Her boyfriend went to the address she wrote down, and it was the home of Paul Mac. Mac said he didn't know Winslet. But then hours later, Mac called the boyfriend and said he did know Winslet. He wanted to hire her as a salesperson for his promotional merchandise business. He canceled the appointment when she said she was moving to San Diego, California. He said he didn't know what happened to her. 12 days after 21-year-old Karen Winslet was seen, her body was found in the trunk of her car in a motel parking lot in North Sacramento. There were no signs of violence on her body, but a toxicology report showed she had died of an overdose of the painkiller Percodan. She had 25 times more the recommended therapeutic amount in her system. The police questioned Paul Mac, and he stated he had met Karen Winslet at the restaurant where she worked. He was doing promotional material for the restaurant. He was planning to start a beef jerky business, and he wanted a salesperson to continue working for the promotional merchandise business. But since Winslet was moving to San Diego, he called off the meeting. Mac claimed that after canceling the meeting, he hung out with his brother. His brother confirmed he was with him that day. The police searched Mac's home, and they noted he did not have any photography equipment. Mac maintained it was because he did not invite Winslet over for a photo shoot. He said there must have been a mix-up and the photo shoot was with someone else. The police collected fibers from Mac's bed sheets and the bedroom carpet. They were a match to fibers found on Winslet's clothes and underwear. Several witnesses said they saw Mac near the hotel where the car with Winslet's body in the trunk was found. Additionally, they spoke with several of Mac's friends. One of them said he picked up Mac near the hotel on the day Winslet went missing. He told several friends he had met a beautiful woman at the restaurant where Winslet worked. A friend who had connections to Budweiser said Mac wanted to take photos of the woman for Budweiser. The district attorney's office determined there was enough evidence to charge Mac with murder. In April 1987, the sheriff's department made arrangements with Mac's lawyer to turn himself in. Instead, he fled the area and became a fugitive. The police tracked his credit cards to Colorado, and then they lost track of him. After Mac ran, his brother contacted the police. He said he had lied about being with his brother that day. Mac's brother said he wanted an alibi because of his past criminal history. Shortly after Mac fled, Margaret Bult met her future husband, Jean-Paul Lanier. After watching the America's Most Wanted segment, Margaret didn't think that her husband looked exactly like Mac, but she did see similarities. It made her much more suspicious of her husband. She looked at the death certificates he had from his family who were killed in the plane crash and from his daughter who was killed when the drunk driver supposedly hit her. After examining them for just a few minutes, she saw that there were problems with them. For example, on his daughter's death certificate, the date was wrong. Also, there wasn't a seal on it, and there were misspelled words. Margaret decided to hire a private investigator. The PI wanted Sean Paul's social security number. In his wallet, Margaret found 2 social security cards with different numbers. She gave the numbers to the PI, and he told her they belonged to 2 deceased individuals. The PI also couldn't find any other information about Sean Paul Lanier, which he thought was odd. On March 21, 1988, the day after the America's Most Wanted episode aired, Margaret confronted Sean Paul. He had a new story. Sean Paul said he was in the Witness Protection Program. When he was living in New Zealand, his parents got mixed up with the Mafia and he testified against them. Margaret did not believe him. Nevertheless, she called the FBI field office to see if his story was true. The agent she talked to said he could not confirm Sean Paul's story for privacy reasons. But he sensed her desperation and he told her he had never heard Sean Paul's name before. Margaret then went to the police with a glass that had Sean Paul's fingerprints on it. The police confirmed they were Paul Stephen Mack's fingerprints. Also, the woman who lived in Marion, who Margaret's friend had contacted weeks earlier, saw the America's Most Wanted episode that featured Mack. In the show, it mentioned that Paul Mack had been the director of an Ohio holding company. She suddenly remembered the phone call with the man who talked to her about Sean Paul Lanier, who said he was the former director of an Ohio holding company. She realized that the man they were calling about was Paul Mack. The woman called the show and said that Mack may be living in Salt Lake City under the name Sean Paul Lanier. On March 22, 1988, 2 days after the show aired, Mack was arrested after trying to run from the home he shared with Margaret Bult. After Mack was arrested, Margaret learned they had maxed out her credit cards and stolen a lot of money from her. Paul Mack went to trial for Karen Winslet's murder in November 1990. Mack testified on his own behalf. He said that Winslet came over and saw cocaine paraphernalia on the table. She was interested in doing some drugs. They did cocaine together, and then they had consensual sex. Afterward, they went out to buy more drugs in her car. But they argued and she kicked him out of her car. That's why he was seen walking near the hotel. The jury deliberated for 13 days. Mack was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury said that Mack was his own worst enemy. They said he simply wasn't believable as he tried to explain away all the evidence. The main discussion wasn't regarding Mack's guilt. Instead, they spent a lot of time debating whether Mack was guilty of 2 special circumstances. The circumstances were that the murder was committed by the administration of poison and during the commission of a rape. If the jury found these allegations to be true, then Mack could have been sentenced to death. The jury concluded that Mack did not intend to kill Winslet with the drugs. 4 of the 12 jurors were not convinced he killed her to cover up the rape. At Mack's sentencing hearing in January 1991, Mack claimed he was innocent and everyone involved with his prosecution was biased against him. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. The police never found enough evidence to charge Mack with Annette Huddle's murder. In 2018, Paul Mack died in prison at age 75. Before he died, he admitted to his attorney he had killed Annette Huddle. After his death, Huddle's family was informed he had confessed to her murder. Number 1. John Homan. In February 1980, 33-year-old John Homan met 35-year-old Lindsay Hannon, who went by Robbie, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. John was recently divorced and ran a boat-building business. He was described as shy and awkward. Robbie said that she was a mother, but both of her children had been killed in a car crash. She said she was from Texas and was expecting a huge inheritance. Within a few weeks, Robbie and John were living together. In October 1980, they moved to Marlow, New Hampshire. In May 1981, they were married, and Robbie took on John's last name. In Marlow, Robbie got a job in customer service at a manufacturing company. Robbie told her husband and co-workers that she was incredibly ill. She claimed to have brain cancer and a rare disease that created too many red blood cells. She left home for days at a time, claiming she was away getting treatment. She also talked frequently about her twin sister, Terry Martin, who lived in Texas. She also called Terry from her office. In September 1982, Robbie told everyone she knew that she was going away for treatment, but things didn't look good. Nearly 6 weeks after she left, on November 10, 1982, a woman claiming to be Terry Martin called John Homan. She informed him that Robbie had died. There was going to be no funeral, and her body was going to be donated to medical research. Terry and John made arrangements for Terry to visit in Marlow. Terry arrived in Marlow 2 days after Robbie supposedly died. John instantly noticed that Terry looked a lot like Robbie. There were only two noticeable differences. Terry had bleached blonde hair and was a little thinner than Robbie. But John reasoned they were identical twins, so it made sense that they looked so much alike. The day after Terry's arrival, they went to a local newspaper and placed an obituary for Robbie. Terry went to Robbie's workplace and met her co-workers. A few people were certain that Terry was really Robbie. Terry moved in with John because they thought being together would help them heal. Terry got a job as a secretary at a book printing company. Several of Robbie's former co-workers were bothered by Terry's sudden appearance after Robbie's supposed death. They decided to go through Robbie's obituary to see if there were any clues in it. The obituary said that Robbie's body had been donated to the Medical Research Institute of Texas. The institute did not exist. The church Robbie supposedly attended in Texas also didn't exist. There was also no record with the coroner's office of Robbie dying. They contacted the police. The police thought that Robbie/Terry looked like Harold Manning, who was wanted for a bank robbery. On January 8, 1983, the police arrested Terry. They asked her what her real name was, and it surprised them. She said she was Audrey Marie Hilley. She said she was wanted in Alabama for writing bad checks. The arresting officers called the police in Alabama, and they confirmed that Audrey Marie Hilley was wanted for writing bad checks. But she was also wanted for murder and attempted murder. Audrey, who went by her middle name, Marie, was born in June 1933 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. She was an only child. Marie's parents both worked long hours, and she was cared for by family members. Apparently, Marie's parents felt guilty about being away so often, so they rarely disciplined her. Marie was 12 her family moved from the small town of Blue Mountain to the nearby city of Anniston. Marie excelled academically, and she was an active member of several clubs. She was also popular socially. Marie met the man who would become her husband, Frank Hilley, when she was 12. They were high school sweethearts, and they married in May 1951 when Marie was 17. After high school, Frank served in the Navy and then secured a position in the shipping department of a foundry in Anniston. Marie got a job as a secretary. In November 1952, Marie gave birth to their first child, a son, Michael. 8 years later, in 1960, Marie gave birth to Carol. The family of four was active in their community and church. Frank's major complaint about Marie was that she liked to spend money. Marie also struggled to hold down a job. Her employers had no problem with her. However, she had problems with her coworkers and would quit because she felt like the other employees were ganging up on her. Marie and her daughter, Carol, had a strained relationship. Carol was a tomboy, and Marie was hoping for a daughter who was more like her. Frank realized that Marie's treatment hurt their daughter, so he tried to be extra kind to Carol. This only angered Marie. In high school, Michael became ill. He was chronically nauseous and often vomited. The illness went away when he moved away for college. In 1974, after Michael moved, Frank was chronically ill. The doctors could not figure out what was wrong, and anything they prescribed didn't help. Things were also terrible at home. The family was deeply in debt due to Marie's excessive spending habits. One day in autumn 1974, Frank came home early because he was sick and found Marie in bed with her boss. Frank thought about leaving her. After discovering Marie in bed with another man, Frank's health problems got worse. In May 1975, it was discovered he had suffered liver failure. On May 25th, while Marie was alone in the hospital room with him, 45-year-old Frank died. There was an autopsy, and the cause of death was labeled infectious hepatitis. Marie collected $31,000 from Frank's life insurance policies. In 2025, that is just over $180,000. Marie then went on a shopping spree and soon spent all the money. The relationship between Marie and her only daughter remained strained. Marie's son Michael and his wife Terry moved in with Marie and Carol after Frank's death. Terry also became mysteriously ill. She was hospitalized 4 times and suffered a miscarriage. Michael and Terry finally decided it was time to move into their own apartment. The night before they were going to move, the family's home caught fire. So Marie and Carol moved into the apartment with Michael and Terry while the house was being repaired. Then, the day before Marie and Carol were going to move back home, the apartment next to Michael and Terry's apartment caught fire. So Michael and Terry had to live with Marie and Carol again temporarily. In January 1977, Marie's mother, who lived with her, Lucille Frazier, died at age 64. It was believed she died of cancer. Marie repeatedly went to the police station with strange complaints. She said that someone kept stealing from her home. She said that one time she found a fire in one of her closets. She also complained about harassing phone calls. Marie and Carol then moved in with Frank's mother, Carrie Hilly. Carrie also fell mysteriously ill. Marie was in relationships with several men, and she told them she had cancer. They would give her money, which she claimed she used for treatment. Michael learned that his mother had run up $6,000 on his credit card. He demanded the money back. After they talked, his mother fed him, and he became the sickest he had ever been in his entire life. In April 1979, 19-year-old Carol Hilly became ill. She was constantly nauseous and would often vomit. She also suffered muscle weakness. In the summer of 1979, Marie was arrested for passing bad checks. She was released on bond. In August 1979, Carol was admitted to the hospital. One day, Carol was speaking to a friend on the phone, and she mentioned that her mother had been giving her injections while she was in the hospital. The friend told the rest of the family, who then informed the doctor. The doctor told Marie he was going to talk to Carol, and Marie immediately transferred Carol to a different hospital. On September 20th, 1979, Marie was arrested again for writing bad checks. After she was arrested, Carol's family talked to her new doctor. They told the doctor they believed Marie was poisoning Carol. He found signs that for months, Carol had been poisoned with arsenic. When someone is poisoned with arsenic, white lines develop under their fingernails. Carol had those white lines. The police then began investigating Marie in connection with the attempted murder of Carol and the murders of her husband Frank and her mother Lucille Frazier. Marie was questioned and she admitted to giving her daughter and mother injections, but claimed it was medicine she had gotten from a friend. On October 3rd, Frank's body was exhumed. 3 days later, Frank's sisters searched the home where Carol Marie had lived with her mother, Carrie Hilly. They found a half-empty bottle of arsenic. Then the toxicology report for Frank's body came back. High levels of arsenic was found in his body. Lucille's body was then exhumed. She had 4 to 10 times the amount of arsenic in her body. It seemed like she most likely died from cancer. Marie was then charged with the attempted murder of Carol. She was released on bail on November 11, 1979. A week later, Marie stole a family member's car and disappeared. Days later, the car was found in Marietta, Georgia. However, there were no clues as to where Marie might have gone. On November 18, 1979, Marie's mother-in-law died. Carrie Hiller was 71 years old. She had been sick with cancer for a while. However, a toxicology report once again indicated high levels of arsenic. In January 1980, while Marie was on the run, she was charged with Frank's murder. After Marie fled, she ended up in Fort Lauderdale, where she met John Homan. Before Marie Hilly was arrested, she had been on the lam for about 3 years. After Marie was arrested, she was extradited to Alabama to face trial for the murder of her husband and the attempted murder of her daughter. Marie Hilly went to trial in June 1983. The defense argued that Carol had poisoned herself. The lawyer said that she was gay, did drugs, and attempted to kill herself 3 times. She was unstable and simply poisoned herself. John Homan remained married to Marie despite her deceptions. He even testified on her behalf. John claimed he never suspected he was being deceived. He believed Robbie had died and Terry was her sister. He definitely did know about her life in Alabama. Carol testified that her mother had been injecting her with an unknown substance. Frank's sister testified, and she said that before Frank died, he had told her that Marie was injecting him as well. The police also had a recording of when the detective interviewed Marie, and she admitted to giving Carol injections. The trial lasted 9 days, and the jury deliberated for 2.5 hours. Marie Hilly was found guilty of the murder of her husband and the attempted murder of her daughter. She was sentenced to life for the murder and 20 years for the attempted murder. Marie was never charged with poisoning her son Michael, who survived, and her mother Lucille Frazier and her mother-in-law Carrie Hilly, who both died. In prison, Marie was a model inmate. Since she had experience as an office worker, she was given a data processing job. In 1985, she was classified as a minimum security inmate. In late 1986 and early 1987, she was given 4 8-hour passes from the prison. There were no problems, and she returned to the prison each time. On February 19, 1987, Marie was released from prison for a 3-day furlough. John Homan moved to Anniston to be closer to his wife. They spent the 3 days in a hotel in Anniston. February 22, 1987 was the last day of the furlough. Marie told John she was going to visit her parents' grave, then she would meet him for lunch at a nearby restaurant. John went to the restaurant, but Marie never showed up. He returned to the hotel room and found a note that read, quote, "I hope you will forgive me. I'm getting ready to leave. It will be best for everybody. We'll be together again. Please give me an hour to get out of town," unquote. She then wrote she found a man who would sneak her into Canada. John contacted the sheriff's office. Searches were conducted, but no trace of Marie Hilly was found. Then, 4 days after Marie went on the lam for a second time, a woman in Blue Mountain, Marie's hometown, called for an ambulance. She had found a woman on her front porch. The woman was wet, muddy, and delirious. She then lost consciousness and started convulsing. She was rushed to the hospital, and along the way, she suffered a heart attack. She was pronounced dead after the doctors worked on her for 3 hours. It was determined that the woman was 53-year-old Marie Hilly. It is believed that for 3 or 4 nights, she had been out in the elements. Her body temperature had dropped to 81 degrees, and this led to a heart attack. The official cause of death was hypothermia and exposure. No one is sure why Marie didn't escape and ended up in her hometown. It's possible that the person who was supposed to help her backed out and she didn't have an alternative plan. Marie Hilly was buried in the grave next to her first husband, Frank, whom she had murdered. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We just want to remind you we started a channel membership where half the funds will go to solve a cold case. For more information, click on the video that's on the screen now. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.